Hello, everyone, and welcome to the online Digging Deeper series. This is Amy David coming at you live from the Sawtooth Mountains. I'm the media coordinator for the Friends of the Sawtooth Avalanche Center and will be the MC and moderator for tonight. The Digging Deeper series is where you get to learn from and participate in discussions with the Sawtooth Avalanche Center forecasters and industry experts. Tonight, we'll hear from professional snowmobile riders and avalanche educators about group management and communication for motorized users specifically. The Digging Deeper presentations are scheduled for every other Wednesday all the way through April. So mark your calendars for the next Digging Deeper on February 3rd, where Chris Lundy will lead a discussion about going beyond the human factors. We've all learned that human factors are often the main cause of avalanche accidents. So what can we do about it? Chris will talk about that specifically on February 3rd. Be sure to keep up to date with other upcoming events and daily avalanche information on social media by following @SawtoothAvi, and also share what you're seeing out in the mountains on social media by tagging us @SawtoothAvi, and we'll make sure to share that information with our forecasters to help build the big picture of what's going on in our forecast zones. You can also submit observations of what you're seeing in the mountains on the website at sawtoothavalanche.com. And that's also where you can sign up for the daily avalanche advisory to be delivered to your email inbox every single morning. We'd like to send a huge thank you to the Friends board and staff, as well as the forecaster team for their endless efforts in making all of these events possible. Huge thank you for tonight, specifically to the snowmobile clubs for virtually hosting this presentation. We have the Sawtooth Snowmobile Club, the Salmon River Snowmobile Club, and the Magic Valley Snowmobile Club, all as our virtual hosts for tonight. So thanks, guys and gals, for being part of the Avalanche Center. The Friends of the Sawtooth Avalanche Center is a nonprofit organization that contributes over 50% of the operating budget for the Avalanche Center, in addition to providing these amazing free and low cost education events and outreach all throughout Idaho. So a large portion of those funds are raised from our fundraising events and come from community donations. And we want to say thank you to everyone who has been able to participate in those events in the past and everyone who's donated this year. If you'd like to donate again, or if you haven't yet, we have a handy dandy new way of donating via Venmo. And we have put the QR code for those of you who use those. You can just scan that code. It should be on the screen right now. And that will take you to the Venmo account for Sawtooth Avalanche. If you'd like to do that in a different way, you can also donate online at sawtoothavalanche.com. And we have a donate button up in the upper right-hand corner of the website. This is what really makes the Avalanche Center go round, and where we can get the support to continue putting out the life-saving information and education every year. So thank you. We greatly appreciate all of your contributions. For tonight's show, we recruited 2 seasoned snowmobilers from the Sierra Avalanche Center, and these guys will share their expertise on group management you can ask your question live by clicking the raise hand button that you can find at the bottom of your screen. And we'll be able to unmute you, and then you can ask that question live, which is a lot more fun than just typing it into the Q&A box. But we'll take all the questions we can get. So after Duncan and Travis give their presentation, which is going to be shorter than our past presentations, we'll be able to focus on the Q&A and really make this a discussion as best we can via the Zoom platform. So to introduce our speakers, we have our seasoned snowmobilers, Duncan Lee and Travis Feist. Duncan spends around 2,000 miles on his snowmobile every winter. Lucky guy. He's a motorized Avalanche education instructor, as an ARI course leader, a pro instructor, and an instructor trainer. When he's not teaching Avalanche classes, he's riding as a professional snowmobile athlete, creating media and product testing. Travis is the Sierra Avalanche Center's education coordinator and has been a field observer since 2010. His background involves 15 seasons of professional ski patrolling, guiding, and avalanche instruction in North America, and 6 seasons of ski guiding and avalanche instruction in Argentina. Travis continues to teach ARI Pro 1 and Pro 2 classes for motorized users. When not working for the Sierra Avalanche Center, he teaches for the Wilderness Education and Outdoor Leadership Program at Lake Tahoe Community College. On powder days, you're most likely to find Travis on a snowmobile, though he still skis and he insists that he enjoys it. I think he probably likes skiing and snowmobiling, but tonight we're just going to talk about snowmobiling. So please help me welcome from afar, Duncan Lee and Travis Feist. You guys can go ahead and do your share screen and take it away.
Okay, cool. First of all, thanks for having us. It's cool to see more outreach programs like this happening in the motorized community across the Western United States. So that's pretty awesome. And yeah, I'm stoked to share some anything. And just a quick note, I don't know if Travis actually likes skiing anymore. I don't think that he does.
Probably not, but I have to say I do.
Fair enough. Travis, did you want to say anything, or should I just jump into
Yeah, let's roll with it.
Cool. This is, let's see. This is probably just what I'm seeing, right?
I see it.
There we go. This should be the whole screen, right? Oh, I think I forgot to click those buttons though. Sorry. Try again. What? Is there audio coming through?
Sounds a little broken.
Audio bad?
Yeah, it's pretty low.
Okay.
Pretty choppy video too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Press the button. Awesome. Yeah, I don't know.
I can try it on my screen, but just not through PowerPoint. I wonder if that makes any difference.
Or I could try it that way as well.
Yeah, I think that might help.
Okay, I'll pull it up. Sorry about this, guys. Do you want to try and share it, Travis?
Yeah, we'll see if I have any more luck.
Okay.
What we're trying to show you guys is a short video that describes the process that we teach here. How's this?
Kind of, yeah, choppy. Yeah, I actually don't hear audio on this one.
Okay. Well, I guess that's on us to describe it then.
Yeah, I mean, whoa. Ah, sorry, now here we go.
Let's just bring up an image of the stickers that describe it, because I think the Sawtooth Avalanche Center printed some of those as well.
Okay.
So people are probably familiar with them.
Does that show?
Yep.
Sweet. So this is the basic, this is the daily flow. The video that we have is a short video you can find online. It just goes into each of these checkpoints, and it's the flow of the day that you can do that we all already do. And this just kind of puts it into a specific process so you don't miss anything. And it's, like I said, it's something we already do as riders. And this just makes it a little more tangible to go out and not miss anything. So before we leave, we figure out who we're riding with, and it's good to kind of note their qualities, whether they're like-minded to you with the similar skill sets or not. And then maybe they're the right choice on a specific given day. And then anticipating conditions is looking at the weather and avalanche conditions and kind of logging that and looking at hazards. And then creating terrain buffers would be actually making a plan on where you're going and what you need to stay away from specifically. And the conditions kind of play into that. And then your partners also play into that. So everything kind of works together. And then confirming the details is kind of what we do at the trailhead. We make sure everybody's on the same page, make a plan, talk about it, and then we check our rescue gear and our essentials. And then once we get out on the snow, we, when we're confirming details, we identify the first place that we're going to stop and talk. And then we do this process while we're on the snow, which is managing our group and maintaining awareness of conditions and terrain. It's an ongoing process, all three of these things, stopping and talking, and then we're managing our group. And that's kind of where we're deciding how to access or how to ride through terrain. And then maintaining awareness is basically riding with your head on a swivel, looking at conditions and the terrain, and then bringing that back to your group so you guys can make good decisions and travel safely. And then at the end of the day, we debrief, and that allows us to look back and decide if we got lucky or if we made good decisions and how we can improve for tomorrow. And then we especially since we work for the Avalanche Center, submitting observations is something that really helps the forecasters and observers, because snowmobilers are out and about and traveling over a ton of terrain on every ride. And so most sledders get to see a whole lot more than anybody else in the backcountry. So it's really important to actually submit observations, and they don't need to be really technical jargon or avalanche professional stuff, but just basic things that you've seen that could help or change weather and avalanche forecasts. So all good stuff. And then I'll just kind of kick it over to you, Travis, to maybe explain anything that I may have missed.
Sure. Well, I think, as you said, this is something that savvy riders already do. I feel really fortunate. Duncan and I met with several industry leaders. What was it, about 5 or 6 years ago in West Yellowstone? So we got to ride on the snow with people like Dan Adams, Matt Ernst, Brett Rasmussen, and we asked them basically, how do you guide clients in avalanche terrain? And this was the list that everybody came up with. And then Duncan and I just kind of changed the language around a little bit to simplify things as much as possible. And um, this is what savvy riders do. And now we just have it in a sticker format that we can just put right in front of our knees on the sled and reference it as we ride throughout the day, because it's just such a dynamic sport. We can't afford to, be taking checklists out of our pockets and field books and stuff like that. It's just nice to have it, front and center on a sticker right there.
It really allows you to dive into the specifics of the on snow portion and ride around with your head on a swivel, really looking and analyzing as you ride. That way you can bring it back to the group to make better decisions. This is one of the stickers, and then the other one is here. And basically this top portion, the more of these that you see, so if you see avalanche activity or other signs of instability and so on, then the more of these you need to stay away from. And that's kind of gaining observations on the fly. You're looking for recent avalanches. You're looking for shooting cracks or whumping. You're looking for a persistent problem if that hollow layer full of sugar snow is still underneath the snow on that December 11th that everybody in the country seems to have this year. If there's recent loading from a fat storm or the sun's just been baking things, then you need to stay away and ride smarter and stay away from steeper slopes, obvious slide path, trigger points, terrain traps, or the terrain that matches the advisory, because the forecasters at the avalanche centers are calling and telling you, they're calling it out and they're telling you where these problems should be living. So if you're noticing the conditions alerts, you need to stay away from the terrain. Whoops, I don't know what I just pressed. So again, Travis mentioned these are stickers, or you can get them put in your wrap. It's really nice to have, especially this sticker out there, because it gives you that structured checklist and it really makes it simple to follow. While you look at stuff, you can actually just run through the checklist, and it kind of presents a different way of riding, especially for people that have taken any avalanche courses. And it gives you that there's a kind of a 3 things you can think about in your head. And it's what's above me, what's below me, what happens if it slides. And that really kind of lends itself to this sticker specifically as well, because you're riding around with your head on a swivel. So I've got some of the conditions here in other forms. I don't know if this is too choppy. There's no sound though. But it's kind of obvious. If you see recent avalanches, then chances are more are going to happen, right? If you see signs of instability, like you're riding on a small feature, on somewhat of a test slope, and you see some cracking, that's a good sign that there's going to be other instabilities out there. So if you're on a similar aspect in elevation, then you can expect to see the same issue again. And if you expose yourself to avalanche terrain, well, then you could have a bigger problem on your hands. This would be an example of a persistent problem. These are really horrible loose grains, much like sugar snow or December 11th weak layer, known as facets. Then here you've got some recent loading. Obviously, this is the epicness, right? This was last year. We had a 6-foot storm rip through the Sierra end of March. And as you can see, we were losing our sleds in the flats. And that's a great problem to have, because you can't even access avalanche terrain. So lucky for us, being on snowmobiles, we get to shred in the open meadows if we can make it, burn a full tank of fuel in 4 hours and call it good, because you've been digging out all day. But this is the type of rapid loading or recent loading that, if you were on avalanche terrain, you'd probably feel the hair on the back of your neck sticking up, because there's just a ton of new load on the current snowpack. And if there's any weak layers down in there, then you could have a potential problem because you just added so much load. Then this is the best picture I had of rapid warming. Sunny, hot, late in the season, solar aspects, just getting a ton of sun. And actually out here in the Sierra, it gets really warm, like t-shirts and board shorts, palm tree hustling out here. So rapid warming, and it's everywhere. It's an issue really, but it depends on how much heat is really hitting the snowpack and what it's doing and changing, and how that's affecting the upper layers of the snowpack. So riding around with your head on a swivel is kind of the name of the game. And using this sticker, the conditions alerts, and applying it to the terrain really helps you kind of go through that checklist to make sure you're not making mistakes. And it's really easy. I mean, motorized users can make a mistake within 5 seconds and be in a problem area. And so it's something that is pretty vital to ride around with the right mindset. And, Travis outlining this type of checklist is a big help, I think, for a lot of riders out there, because it almost takes the guesswork out of it, and you can just look at the sticker and apply it to what you're doing. Travis, any comments on that?
I do want to point out that there's no math involved. And so some riders may have seen similar tools where you're supposed to keep track of these things throughout the day and take out a pencil and add them up. And if you get a certain number, you do go. And if you don't get that number, then you don't, or vice versa. And I, I just think that it's too dynamic of an activity for that kind of thing. And so this is fairly subjective. There's no math, there's no thresholds involved. It's just simply the more conditions alerts you see, the more terrain alerts you avoid.
Keeping it simple makes it much more enjoyable and allows us to travel the same amount of terrain that we've been traveling without the proper education. So it's kind of, there's not much change to your riding day when you go through the proper steps, is what I'm trying to get at. Like on the big days that you want to go send it, you can still go send it, but maybe you're thinking about things in a different light, and you're able to apply this checklist. So again, the more of these you see, stay away from more of these. Pretty simple. Slope angles, over 30 degrees is avalanche terrain. Stay away from obvious slide paths. The obvious ones usually aren't the ones that get us. Look out for trigger points. Convex rollers are a classic one. And then terrain traps. And here's just a bunch of trees that could really increase your hazard or increase your consequences, because if you triggered that avalanche and got ripped through those trees, that would be a bummer of a day. And then does the advisory talk about, or does the terrain match the advisory? Whoops. How does this play? Oh, well. Oh, there we go. This is an interesting one. It's a remote triggered avalanche. You can't see it. It's going to start coming down above him from like a couple 100 feet up. He has no clue that he just triggered a weak layer. And now you can see it in the upper portion of the screen, just sliding down. So I guarantee that the advisory was talking about that specific problem at that elevation and aspect. And all it takes is some basic research before your ride to stay away from issues like that. And I'd say that's the extent of my PowerPoint for today.
It's just that simple.
It is that simple. One of the things, situational awareness and managing your group, it can be really tricky on snowmobiles, because we all have that buddy who rips off around the corner at always the wrong time and is gone for 30 minutes, or goes and gets stuck and didn't tell anybody. And then his radio battery dies, or he's got ice in his mic, or there's all these issues. And depending on the day, that's not a big problem. If it's on the wrong day, it could be a pretty big problem. But managing your group is more like how you travel through the terrain, and really having a clear understanding of everybody in your group of the plan. And so eyes on is a very big thing for riding on high hazard days, or even moderate to considerable hazard days, depending on the terrain you're pushing into and the type of riding you're doing. And the more you kind of work on ways to travel with your riding partners, the better you can be at this, and the more fluid it can be. So depending on your normal riding group, like when Travis and I go ride, not that we get to a ton, but it's pretty fluid. If it was just the two of us, I'd be able to look ahead. He'd look back at me, give me a signal of, hey, keep your eyes on, or maybe space out with some hand gestures. And we'd be able to cruise through terrain and only expose one at a time to potential avalanche paths or avalanche problems, and be able to really rip through a day and cover a lot of terrain. When your group gets bigger, this becomes harder, but setting clearer guidelines and using more communication is the key with that. And then just really having a good plan for your group, I think, is the important part there. Travis, you want to add anything, and then we'll maybe go into the question and answer part?
Well, I think, one thing that I see fairly often in riding crews is that the best rider just takes charge, and it's kind of a follow me. If you can keep up, we'll have a good day. And when there's no structure to it, that's when things tend to go wrong. And so just because somebody's the best rider doesn't mean they're the best group manager. And it really helps to have a process like this to get everybody on the same page and make sound decisions and travel together for the day.
Hi again. Awesome. Thanks, you guys, for that overview of the daily flow. I think now's a great time, like you said, Duncan, to dive into the question and answer session. So I'll just give a quick reminder to everyone that's watching of how you can participate. We'd really love for this to be a discussion of all of you on the other side of the screen with Travis and Duncan, and I'm just here to help moderate that. So if you have questions for these guys, you can click the raise hand button down at the bottom of the screen, and that would be first choice, so that you can then ask your question by just talking into your computer or your phone. Otherwise, feel free to click the Q&A box and type your question there, and I can read it to Travis and Duncan. I know a lot of you are over at, I believe, CJ's shop. So if one of you could be your representative and kind of manage the tech side of things, and if anyone else is watching in groups, that would be a great way to tackle this, is have somebody be your tech person. So we can really have a full-on open discussion. We saved a lot of time tonight just to do that. And so looks like we have some questions starting to come in. We also wanted to say thanks for your patience on the technical difficulties. I know we've had some internet connection and then some video challenges, but Zoom works great until it doesn't. So thanks for your patience with us. All right, well, so I had a question I can start us off for you guys, since it was what you were just talking about with group management. I know personally, I've gone in the last few years from being like the least talented in the group to about in the middle of the group, and have been that person where we get to the zone and I stay in the meadow and everyone else gets to go up in the trees where they can ride. And for me, that's been challenging, where I radio in, like, you guys still okay? Like, I can't have eyes on when I was first starting out riding. What kind of advice would you give for the person that is the one that's in the meadow that can't have eyes on the, more skilled in the group? And then also in reverse, what advice would you give that really skilled person, say the strongest riders in the group, on how to manage a group that has diverse skill levels, but you're still a group riding together for the day? That's kind of a big question, but what kind of tips would you give for both people on the spectrum there?
Well, I'll jump in, and the technique I use most often in that kind of situation is the buddy system. And instead of, if I have 6 people out for the day, why not just have 2 people riding in the meadow and then 2 people on one hillside, 2 people in the trees somewhere else? I think that's a pretty efficient way to break it down. Keep eyes on everybody.
Yeah, I totally have to agree. If you're riding with radios, which everybody should be, then, breaking up into smaller groups is an acceptable way to go. And then if the person with eyes on the other, if they have an issue, they can radio in to bring in everybody else.
Awesome, thanks. All right, we've got a question from Jeremy Black. Cutting straight to the chase. Where can you get the stickers? So, Jeremy, I can answer that for the Sawtooth Avalanche Center side of things. We did print some Daily Flow stickers. Travis was nice enough to let the Sawtooth Avalanche Center brand some with the Daily Flow. And you can send an email to Scott or just info@sawtoothavalanche.com, and we can get the clubs and anyone else who wants them some stickers that you can put on your snowmobiles. Okay, Steve, we've got a question. What is your recommendation, or what is your recommended beacon and why?
It's the one you practice with.
Can you elaborate a little on what that entails?
All the manufacturers nowadays are making good beacons. That's the reality of it. I think the industry struggled for a little while with some oddities, but nowadays, if it's on the shelf at your local retailer, it's a good beacon. And they all function slightly differently, so they take practice, and you need to get familiar with whatever you're going to carry.
Great. Yeah, we just opened up the Baker Creek Beacon Park, and that's a great place to practice. You can go by yourself or with your riding crew and go and practice and time each other. Make it a fun competition amongst your riding crew who can save the other person faster.
And I think on the flip side of that, I really like to practice my beacon searches slowly. I think that a lot of people who practice and have a friendly competition kind of encourage each other to take shortcuts. And if slow is smooth, smooth is fast. So slow down, do it the right way, reinforce doing it the right way, and then speed comes.
Do you have any recommendations on how people can set up a practice with their transceivers and even the full rescue practice? If they don't have a beacon park nearby, or if you're just out in the field, or you're at the trailhead getting ready to ride and you want to do a practice with the group that you're going with. Do you guys have any recommendations?
Don't do it on a powder day, because your friends are never going to go along with it. And if they do, they're not going to invite you back out again next time. I actually have an old tunnel bag that I take out on, when it's not a powder day and I suspect we might be doing some rescue practice. And so I'll bury a transmitting beacon in an old tunnel bag so it doesn't get damaged when my friends probe it. So I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, and if you're going to do that, it's important to really set up a clear understanding of your debris field. That way people can really be comfortable with the situation and the practice scene. And then, like Travis said, practicing slow and really building the fundamental skills is the real way that you'd be able to accomplish and successfully save somebody if you had to do the real thing. So, and practicing every step, I think, like, you can be really good with your transceiver. That's neat. But if you had no clue how to probe or shovel, you're still not getting the job done. So really kind of focusing on every step. And there's a lot of information out there on YouTube and on online that you can find about those specifics. And then just take a rescue class. They're one day. It's an easy way to go, and you get to drill all day long and then learn a specific way to set up practice on your own.
Awesome. Yeah, I know on sawtoothavalanche.com we have on the calendar a pulled list of all the different providers that do the companion rescue courses that people can find all in one place. And I know a lot of those providers will do private courses too, if you want to get your club or your friends together to do that. super helpful. I know personally we recruited our friends and said, like, you got to take this class if we were going to keep riding together, and they did. So all right, well, kind of along the same lines as our first question, Susie just sent one in, and I'll just read it verbatim for you. She said, I ended up with two fellas on a recent ride without beacons. They came with someone from the industry, so I assumed they came prepared. Lesson learned about assuming. I had no idea how to handle this mid-ride. Any suggestions?
Susie, that's an interesting one for sure. However, a trailhead check would flush out this issue right away. And a trailhead check is something that every riding group should be doing at the start of every ride to ensure everybody has the right gear, they know how to use it, and you're covered for the day. And then you're also talking about the plan really quick. A proper trailhead check does not take very long. It should be a few minutes. And you just check function of your transceivers, that everybody knows how to turn them on. They can read battery power. You check the sending and receiving functions of everybody's really quick. And then you make sure everybody has probes and shovels, and then you can head out. If you've never ridden with the people before, it's probably good to ask, or at least have them show you that they know how to assemble them, which takes a little bit longer. But if you've ever thrown your probe and shovel together, it takes all of like 30 seconds. So it's not a very long process. There's a handful of people out there that would still be alive if proper trailhead checks were done. And so that's why we need to do it every ride. And then it's not an issue like dealing with this. Oh, hey, wait, what do you mean you don't have a transceiver on? Like, I would probably be, up in their face and not worried about calling them out. But at the trailhead, when you do that whole process, it kind of makes a environment to where I don't think you're calling anybody out. And then depending if anybody carries extra stuff, which is a good idea, then you get to loan it out and show them why they need it.
All right, so along the same topic of partners, Pro Alpine Mark just sent in a question asking, can you talk about how partners can influence your day similarly to the forecast or conditions?
Well, I know when I go ride with Travis, we get less training done because he wants to ride so much, and I'm like, ow, ow, twist my arm. That's fine. So it's real, yeah. Like partners influence your day drastically because everybody's looking for it. Like depending on what your goals are for the day, most of the time, a lot of people are kind of like pushing to get into gnarlier terrain, perhaps. And in that situation, they're really like coming up with reasons why it's okay. And if you don't see any obvious signs, but the advisory still talked about a problem, then you really have to you've got to take it all in and just take a step back. Partners can be interesting to deal with in those situations for sure. And I think that the next time you go ride with them, you may be thinking if that's the right day to ride with them or not, depending on how they influenced your ride. So really choosing your partners wisely is a big part of it.
Okay. So does anyone from the Sawtooth Snowmobile Club have some questions? You can hit the raise hand feature and just ask those. In the meantime, it looks like Chris might have a question to ask. Is that right, Chris?
Yeah, well, our viewers are thinking of what they'd like to ask. One question I had is, so say you've been riding in some trees and you kind of pop out into the sort of the alpine and you're looking at a whole new untracked bowl, and you kind of stop and regroup. What kind of conversation should take place there? Like, how would you suggest people talk about like where would be good places to play, where would be good places that should be avoided? Like what sort of communication needs to take place, like when you kind of break into a new bowl or circ?
Every time I get into a new play zone, we'll stop and look at the stickers. And so, the conditions alerts were kind of looking backwards, and I'm asking my partners what they saw on our way to that play zone. And then we use the terrain alerts looking forwards at the play zone. And then we need to draw, really specific boundaries. Make sure that everybody's very clear. Okay, do you see that cliff on the right? Nobody's going to go any farther right of that, and we're not going to go above this. And I really need to, make eye contact with people, make sure that I'm getting a nod back, and everybody understands exactly how we're going to treat that new piece of terrain.
I'll follow up on that with a question. So say you have a riding group that isn't normally doing this process, and you come in as the person that wants to have this discussion. Do you have any advice on how to bring up that discussion if others are not necessarily on board and they're like, yeah, we're just going to go ride? How do you have that discussion and have it be effective instead of being like outcast if it's not part of the culture of that group already?
Well, I think that's a really good question. I think people could struggle with it before they actually try it, because it might seem like it's onerous. But again, the process is what savvy riders already do. And so as soon as you convince your partners to give it a shot, they're going to recognize pretty quickly that it doesn't interfere with the day. So I think that's more of maybe like a personal, more introspective resistance. And your partners probably won't feel that at all after they've given it a try.
I think also on that is, proposing questions and asking people what they've seen and what they think is a good way to get their involvement.
Awesome. All right, Ryan Guest sent in a question. Says, it was mentioned earlier how easy it is to get into trouble while riding. Any tips or suggestions on getting out of situations once you find yourself exposed?
I mean, if you're already exposed, then hopefully you have eyes on, and then get out of there as quickly as possible. If you're dealing with the avalanche problem listed in the advisory for the day, or same aspect, same elevation. If there's not eyes on, you probably want to radio to your group and try and get some eyes on you as quickly as possible and describe where you are. And hopefully you have people that are able to at least come and put eyes on. And that way, if anything does happen, then a rescue can be performed. And then just have a good understanding of, what some exits are. If you have a straight shot off of a start zone or a potential slab, snowmobiles can get up to high speeds pretty quick. So outrunning avalanches has been done, and you can have a pretty good chance if you're not thrown off your machine by the turbulent or the stock wall. And then making sure that you know how to deploy your airbag and just, I don't know, stay above it, do your best. I think that the trick is really not getting yourself exposed in the first place, and recognizing when you need to either stop and turn out before getting in the situation.
Yeah, that happened to me just a few weeks ago. I don't remember exactly what we were dealing with as far as the avalanche problem or the hazard was, but it was elevated. And we were riding some trees, and all my partners were noticing cracking out in front of their sleds. And we were on test slopes, and we were discussing it. Every time we stopped to regroup, everybody said like, oh, this is what just happened to me around the corner. And then we did exactly what was just asked. We kind of like snuck up on a more exposed area that we weren't expecting, but because we had already been discussing everything previously, it was so easy to just stop and make a group decision like, hey, based on what we just saw, we're not going into this new zone.
That reminds me of a situation I was in the first year I started snowmobiling, when I wasn't, when you realize you're a little out of your league and you got to turn around and go back down. And I didn't really know how to turn around and go back down, and got stuck on a slope that was definitely avalanche terrain. Good old newbie here on the hill climb. And my partner, Jeremy, radioed to me and he's like, you got to get out of this one on your own. Like, yeah. I can't come up there because this is avalanche terrain and we can't overload the slope. And so do you have any, I guess, clear and concise points to drive home multiple people on a slope at once versus where you have eyes on somebody on a safe zone, and if you get stuck, having to figure that out on your own versus multiple people in the hazard.
Well, we actually have a mnemonic, a memory device that we sometimes teach people. I'm not personally a fan of acronyms and mnemonics all that much, but STUCKS works pretty well. So STUCKS, stop, talk, understand consequences, keep spotters.
Oh, that's a good one. Can you say that one more time?
Stop, talk, understand consequences, keep spotters. STUCKS.
It's gold. You got good stuff. All right, well, I'm gonna jump to Guy Chirp. He is our first person to raise his hand for a live question. Guy, I'm gonna click allow to talk, and now you can unmute yourself and ask your question live.
Nice. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Thanks for presenting tonight. Really helpful information. You talked earlier about the trailhead check. And maybe there's an assumption in there that the whole riding group knows sort of basically the plan for the day and what kind of terrain or what your goals are for the day and objective. Do you have any tips or suggestions on sort of what process you're doing and how you're sharing that plan for the day? Is that a pre-night thing? Are you sending it out? Are you talking about it beforehand? And particularly if people aren't intimately familiar with the terrain, maybe it's the first time riding in it in the area, and you're looking at maps and that kind of stuff.
Well, what time of the day is the forecast published with the Sawtooths? Is it 7 in the morning?
7:30.
7:30. Yeah. So I think you probably want to save that planning process until after the forecast has been published. You might be able to anticipate it to some degree the night before. So you've already determined which trailhead you're going to be meeting at, but you really can't get into the nitty gritty until that forecast has been published. And I think one thing that really helps is to talk about terrain in general. So not so much specific drainages or features, things like that, but just what are we willing to expose ourselves to today? Are we willing to get into really complex terrain, or do we need to keep it fairly simple? Do we need to avoid avalanche terrain altogether? And if those are easy to communicate with your partners, then you don't get into, the details of like, oh, there, where that one mine is up there, we're going to stay away from that. You don't need to get into that level of detail at the trailhead.
Great. I just thought that maybe that's a predecessor to this question of if you're, pop out of some trees and you're in a new circ or something like that. I mean, if you had sort of general objectives for the day and people are understanding of that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. If you've agreed to keep it simple and you're playing in simple terrain and suddenly you pop up into something really complex, then you've already made that agreement. It makes the decision easier at that point.
Thanks.
Travis, I'm just going to jump in here real quick to follow up on what you said, the simple versus complex terrain. Could you guys give an overview of what constitutes the difference of simple, challenging, complex terrain, and then how can snowmobilers utilize that while they're planning their day with their group, and have that communication before going into the field and then also while you're in the field? But just an overview of what those different types of terrain classifications mean.
Sure. Well, that comes from the Canadians. It's called the Avalanche Terrain Exposure Scale. And so just by that name alone, it implies that it's avalanche terrain to begin with. So they have 3 different categories: simple, challenging, and complex. I like to also talk about non-avalanche terrain. So the Canadians don't mention that very often because they're assuming that you're already in avalanche terrain. But I think as snowmobilers, we can often have fun in non-avalanche terrain. So there's 4 categories to me. Non-avalanche terrain needs to be avalanche proof, no matter what the conditions are like. If it's a 20-year avalanche cycle, it's not going to slide. So very low angle terrain, trees, meadows, no exposure from overhead, just 100% avalanche proof. Then simple avalanche terrain. Yes, there's some exposure, but it's very easy to recognize where the exposure is. It's easy to avoid it. Then on the other end of the extreme is complex terrain. There's basically no way to avoid it. As soon as you're committing to that terrain, you're exposing yourself. And then challenging terrain is the middle category, and that's where you're kind of scratching your chin. You're not really sure. You think, oh, if we head up to this little spot there and then we turn right, then we're reducing our exposure. But it's more challenging to manage your group through it. So non-avalanche, simple, challenging, complex.
I think one of the important things to remember about that classification scale is really separating it from riding ability, because those words kind of go hand in hand with, oh, that's challenging to ride. So we just got to make sure we make that distinction, that it's talking about avalanche hazard instead of riding.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that stuff.
Yeah, I'll throw in a question here. Travis, you just mentioned, this concept of test slopes briefly in your story from recently. And if you guys could just talk a little bit about like what constitutes a good test slope, how might you test that slope, and maybe what sort of avalanche problems might be appropriate for using a test slope?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the advantages of modern snowmobiling is that we really enjoy playing around on small terrain features. I think for many of us, gone are the days that we're looking for giant slopes to high mark. Like that style of riding has just gone away. And so when we're playing in more technical terrain, we can use slopes that have minimal consequences as test slopes. And they need to have minimal consequences. So if you do trigger an avalanche, even if it's bigger than you expected it to be, it's not going to kill you. So that's what I define a test slope as. As far as what avalanche types you can test on test slopes, really I'd say storm slabs, wind slabs, and then a loose wet, loose dry avalanche type. I'm not going to use test slopes for persistent slabs. I'm not going to use test slopes for a deep slab avalanche type. I'm not going to use test slopes for wet slabs. Those are too unpredictable. I can get, false negative results. I can use a test slope and think that it's stable, and then turn around the corner and find something unstable. So I really limit those to storm slab, wind slab, loose wet, loose dry.
We've got a real snowmobile question here that follows up on that from RJB. And the question is, does roosting through layers affect propagation, or is it more weight related?
Using a few different ways to test the slope is kind of what you're looking for. I'm actually going to share with you guys a couple pictures of some tests here we've done in our, does that come through? So here you can see he approached this convex roller from the top. It's seriously the bottom of the photo is where it flattens out. And you can see the cracking around his sled. He's diving his spindle down like a downhill kind of transition turn, not just a powder turn, but his weight's on one side. He really set that spindle and ski into the snow, looking for a new snow instability. So this is a wind loaded spot right here. So kind of testing the wind slab, and you can see some chunks pulling out. Another way would be to side hill across it. Similar feature here. And he's just side hilling right on that convex roller, really looking for a trigger point, seeing if anything happens, and eyes on from the view of the camera here, really looking for any instabilities or cracks to shoot. The next one here is another way to test the slope, right? We're starting to have a little more fun. but he was side hilling, then upturn to the right, and he's actually going to land all his weight down right here back in his track. But again, you're like loading that slope with a bunch of weight. So it's really basically any way you get on the slope looking for a trigger point is what you're trying to do, and trying to get some sort of reaction in the snow. And like Travis mentioned, specifically to the avalanche problem you're dealing with, which would be newer snow avalanche problems. So just trying to find some sort of reactivity is what you're looking for. And again, can't stress enough that it's unconsequential. So if there was propagation, if there was a chunk that pulled out, you're not getting buried, you're not getting dragged into terrain traps. You have eyes on you, and you're just really looking for some sort of reactivity.
Thanks for showing those photos. That was a perfect example to help visualize it. Well, if anyone else has questions, please feel free to raise hand like Guy did, and get those so we can talk live and ask those. While you're thinking of questions or typing them in the Q&A box, I have one more for you, both Duncan and Travis. Could each of you tell a brief story of a situation where you were out riding and you were assessing the conditions based on that list and the sticker that you guys showed us of how to assess the conditions in the field? And then if your plan changed throughout the day based on that assessment, and how did you manage your group and communicate with your group to change your plan for the day? If you have a situation like that, or something along the lines where you were utilizing that conditions checklist, and then how you apply that to your group management.
I can just lead off. Out here in the Sierra, we're actually fortunate in our terrain that we usually have non-avalanche terrain that's nearby. So we can continue to ride in high hazard and just avoid slopes if things are changing that rapidly. But this story comes from Canada. I like to go up there a few times a season, except for now that the border's closed, it's not happening. But a couple seasons ago, late in the season, late March, maybe even April, we were up there and accessed a zone, and the mountains up there have some pretty rapidly changing things at different elevations, and you're riding from 1,000 feet up to 8,000 feet. So your elevation change is massive. And throughout the day, it warmed up a whole lot more, and we saw some recent slides through an area called the Gauntlet, and it's called that because you do have to ride through some complex terrain to access the next portion or play zone you're looking for. And after looking at the conditions and seeing how things were changing, we decided to get out of there a lot quicker than were planning, because we knew that it was just going to get worse. And so we kind of wrangled everybody together. You get on the radio, and you got to kind of spread the information. And so, and it was kind of like, hey, look, we've got to bail. We've got to get out of here. We've seen these avalanches, and these conditions alerts continue to pop up. So it's time to change our plan and play safer and not get into a sticky situation. So we chose to ride out before things got worse and just play in a different area that we had already played in, and kind of have an earlier day. But it can be interesting, and some people are like, what do you mean, what the heck, like, we're out here to shred today, what, like and you just kind of have to point things out and really you can actually use the sticker too, like go back through it and say, well, look, here's this, and here's this, and where we're going is all of these. So it's not happening. Oop, you're muted.
Whoops. I was going to say, Travis, do you have any stories that you would share?
Sure. Yeah, Duncan, would you mind putting the alerts sticker back up on the screen?
Sure.
And this happened to me just a few weeks ago, actually. We had a riding crew of about 4, and Again, I don't remember exactly what our avalanche forecast was for the day. It was probably moderate persistent slab problem. And all of us were coming from different areas, meeting at this one trailhead. And when we stopped to do our trailhead check, the very first item on that conditions alert came up where one of us who drove up a canyon from a different direction as everybody else said, well, I saw a natural avalanche on Hawkins Peak and it looked like it went to the ground. And that kind of got everybody, thinking a little bit. Then as we were riding, the first place that we stopped, we had to ride maybe 4 or 5 miles of groomed road before we got into our first play zone. And we were play riding, having fun, non-avalanche terrain. But as soon as all 4 of us stopped in the same place, the last guy to pull up collapsed the whole area that we were on. And so everybody could hear the whoomph. We could actually see the snowpack dropping by about 2 inches. So that counts as another sign of instability. And again, we were forecasting a persistent problem for the day. So we've immediately checked the first 3 items in the conditions alerts. And it was just obvious to everybody that we were going to rein it in for the day. And so at that point, when we had that collapse, we went through the checklist and said, look, guys, it's, we were talking about going to this zone. We're not going to that zone today. We're going to keep it simple. We're going to stay over here. And I think it was a pretty effective way to kind of change our plan based on the conditions we were seeing.
Yeah, it seems like having this sticker right on your console is super helpful.
Yeah.
You can just constantly be looking at it, and it's an easy conversation point to have with your group. Well, thanks for sharing those stories. It's always helpful to learn from those. Chris, did you have another question or some input there?
Yeah, I guess, as an avalanche forecaster and a snow nerd, I like digging snow pits a lot. And although admittedly on my days off, I'm a little less enthusiastic about it, but thought it might be interesting for you guys to talk about what role snow pits have for you guys, if at all.
My current role with snow pits is showing students what they look like and performing some tests to show them what professionals are doing, like yourself, and then submitting observations. Submitting some sort of column test to the Avalanche Center can be pretty good data for them, as long as they know that I'm doing them correctly. Would maybe be a question back to you, I would guess, but the quality of your data is pretty important, right? And other than that, my favorite pit is the track check, or when I get super stuck, I put my hands in the snow and I'm looking for strong over weak. And I think most recreationalists, if you're cruising around trying to identify a strong layer, which would be your slab, over a weak layer, which would be your weak layer or potential layer you could trigger, then you're winning. That's what you're hunting for, unless you've got multiple problems and a better understanding of all that. But, digging a pit takes time, and the tests are, like you mentioned, for nerds, because it's a real data collection thing. So while it's great to provide that information, that high level of data for the Avalanche Center, and I think that's pretty important, I really try not to dig on days when I'm out riding, having fun. I look to confirm the advisory by getting my hands in the snow. Travis?
Well, yeah, I'm a fan of informal tests. So track checks, and I'll work incrementally higher on a test slope and see what I can do. And those are all checking the same box as the formal tests. Those are other signs of instability. So if I can find signs of instability without digging a formal profile and pissing off my friends by taking too much time, then that's all I need to do. I do think that the more formal profiles that do take more time have a lot of value for lifelong learning, but they probably don't influence my decision-making day to day.
I always remember what Scott Savage said as advice for if you're not trying to do a big pit profile for an observation, was when you were out riding, was it crusty hard pack? Was it not fun to ride? Because often that snow tells something about the snow versus was it a blow or powder day? And did your truck have 5 inches of new snow when you got back to the trailhead at the end of the day? Like, even those simple observations can be helpful and can tell you a lot about the snow, for what it's doing today and then what it's going to be like after the next storm potentially. So yeah, getting your hands in the snow can tell you a lot, even if you're not doing an ECT test or a specific pit profile. Travis, I had a follow-up question for you. You said track. Do you say track test? Could you elaborate a little on what that entails, or how, what kind of hand tests can people do when they're out riding?
Sure. I mean, we're ideally we're riding in conditions where we're going to be digging trenches, right? Like that's why we're all out there. And so anytime you do trench in and you're stuck, before you just roll your sled out of it, step behind the machine, have a look at the layers that are in your trench. You can actually just carve out a small block of snow. If you find a weak layer, carve out a small block of snow above the weak layer and pull on it with your hand, see how cleanly it comes off. And then if I'm digging trenches on test slopes, I'll often try to work my way up. So I've undercut the slab with my first trench and then I ride higher above it. And that's pretty similar to doing a more formal test like an ECT. You're putting a load on top of an isolated column of snow. So I think that's a pretty effective test.
Awesome. Does anyone else have questions to ask these guys while we've got them here? We'll give you a few more minutes to put more questions on there. Well, while we see if we have any final questions for you guys, I figured we could bring it back to the daily flow. And we've talked a lot about what people can do when they're planning their day before leaving, a few good tactics for assessing the status while you're on the snow, actually out riding. But I'd love to hear more from you about what you do at the end of the day, what that debrief, and we did talk about submitting observations, but I think that we have some space to talk about what a debrief looks like when you're out with just your riding buddies. If it's a casual day of riding, what does that debrief look like? What kind of questions can you ask each other and talk about?
The first question on the debrief is who's got the bruise? So you're back at the trailer and you probably have a little while before you take off. So it's nice to crack a beer and hang out for a minute. And that's kind of when you can let any stress go or whatever, or keep the stoke if it's been just an epic day. And I think, it provides an opportunity to call out the people that maybe put anybody else in danger or did something stupid. And depending on your group, and we're pretty sarcastic in my crowd, and it's a good chance to just call each other out and be pretty blunt about it. Because if you don't say anything, then it'll go unchecked, and then you're leaving options open for it to happen again or for a problem in the future. And then, just some of the questions like hey guys, what went good today? What went bad today? And if we're riding tomorrow because it was epic. So what do you guys want to change because of today's results? So, it can be pretty quick. It can be pretty easy. And I think just doing some sort of debrief is the key, and building on the choices you made from today to make tomorrow better.
I think you nailed it.
Since we moved into the end of the day section, I just wanted to throw in a plug for sending information to the Avalanche Center. And, Duncan mentioned this before, but we really don't care if you did a snow pit. We don't really care what your snow pit test was. But I think that daily flow checklist is a pretty awesome checklist for information that we're looking for too. Did you see avalanche activity? Did you see those signs of instability? What did you see of those conditions alerts? And then what terrain did you feel comfortable riding? And what terrain you chose for the day tells us a lot about the conditions. So I think that daily flow is a good checklist to use for sending us information at the end of the day. But any information helps. It doesn't need to be in scientific terms. And we'd actually probably prefer if it wasn't.
Awesome. Yeah, I saw Duncan, you had shared the daily flow in the chat box here. So if
Yeah,
anyone
that
wants
video,
to
yeah.
watch that, it's really good. I've watched it a few times, and we'll be sure to share it on our social media as well, so that everyone watching can see that with the audio up. Well, does anyone else have questions? We're getting close to our time frame here and want to be respectful of everyone else's time. But if you have questions, now's a great time to ask those, or situations you'd like some advice on or insight on from Travis and Duncan. And we might be rolling up towards the end of our talk tonight. Travis and Duncan, do you guys have, I guess, any final words of wisdom or things that you make sure that you think about every day while you're going out riding? Anything you'd like to add?
I am a fan of looking at every day as a learning opportunity. And it's just amazing to me what I've learned over the years, and I'm looking forward to continuing to do so.
I don't know if I have a good follow-up to that one.
Sorry, Dunk.
Yeah, I mean, I think that following the process is the key, and it's not a laborious process. It's easy to do, and chances are you already do it, but having a structure to it makes it easier, and you'll make better decisions because of it. And it's changed the way I ride through the years, and I feel like I'm a more accomplished rider because of it. And the places I get to go ride are that much better because we're just identifying when it's right to go there.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. It looks like we've got all the questions answered. I think it was a really thorough presentation and conversation, and thank you so much for taking the time tonight to talk with all of us. Really appreciate that.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
So if anyone else has follow-up questions or would like to learn more from these two guys, you can find them. Where can we find you guys? What information would you like to give out if people want to follow up with you?
You can find me at Travis at SierraAvalancheCenter.org.
Duncan, where can we find you?
Probably easiest just through social media. I surf Instagram a little bit. It's the Duncan 775. And I'm really horrible at Facebook, so I wouldn't try there. Otherwise, you can find us at the Sierra Avalanche Center Avalanche courses. We're out here teaching a lot this winter, so if you really want to come and see us, that's how you do it.
I'll be out in your neighborhood in March. Going to be looking forward to riding some of my favorite terrain. I really like it out there.
So, well, we did tag Duncan in our social media, and then Travis, I couldn't find you on social media.
That's good. That's good.
Best, I guess. We again appreciate all of your time, and for everyone that's watching, if you'd like to get some of the stickers of the daily flow, send an email or a direct message. You can do email info@sawtoothavalanche.com, or you can send us a message on Instagram, Sawtooth Abbey, and keep tagging us with the observations, things that you see out in the mountains, if it's an avalanche or just your track pit, if you get stuck and dig a little snowmobile pit there or a deep one. Send us those photos. It really does help. Like Chris was saying, it helps the forecasters build that big picture, since sledders can cover so much terrain. It's a really great resource to have all of you out there and be on board to help the Avalanche Center out. So you can also submit observations on the website, sawtoothavalanche.com. And I think that's just about it for tonight. So mark your calendars for the next Digging Deeper on February 3rd. We'll hear from Chris about going beyond the human factors. And if you'd like to take another Avalanche course or dive deeper, we've got a whole list of local courses and providers on our website. Under the calendar tab, you can go to education events for Idaho, or venture out into the Sierras and go find Travis and Duncan. So with that, we are gonna wrap it up for tonight.
Good night.
All right.
Thank
Good
you.
night.